Today we're taking a look at one of the most requested proto-languages here on Learn Hittite, and actually it's one of my favourites. Now, some researchers tentatively see this language family as a distant cousin to Indo-European, an idea that we've actually explored in previous videos, but for many a claim that remains far from being demonstrated. So if these two language families are not genetically related, we can at least say that they are very good neighbours. In many respects, I think this language family is far more interesting to try and unpack than Indo-European. Hopefully I'll be able to show you why today. Welcome folks, I'm Learn Hittite, and in this video we're going to be looking at Proto-Uralic. So first up, some general bits and pieces about the language family. The Uralic language family consists of around 40 languages, depending on how you count them, many of which are spoken by very small communities, typically only a few thousand and often just a few hundred speakers. There are, however, 3 languages which have more than 1 million speakers. Common sources state, for example, that Hungarian has the most native speakers, around 14 million, Finnish has around 5 million, and Estonian has about 1.1 million speakers, give or take. Most reference works put the total number of first language speakers across the entire family at around 25 million, though in my opinion that upper estimate is a little bit high and a figure in the low 20 million range is probably more realistic. Now, whilst the Uralic language family might not be particularly impressive in terms of its numbers of speakers, where it does shine is its geographic spread. The range of the Uralic family is truly remarkable, as we can see on screen now with this map showing the distribution of Uralic language branches at the beginning of the 20th century. The Uralic languages have spread across a vast region stretching from the Danube in the west to areas east of the Yenisei River in Siberia and all the way north to the Arctic Ocean. The Homeland question, like with other Eurasian language families, is still open to debate. The two most persuasive theories boil down to this: a west of the Urals origin in the Volga region, which is backed by some paleolinguistic arguments and early Uralic Proto-Indo-European contact, and an east of the Urals homeland in western Siberia. The eastern view was historically tied to perceived resemblances with the so-called Altaic languages. Now today those similarities are usually explained as a real contact rather than proof of genetic relationship. That's of course not to say that there isn't some deep connection there, that's definitely not impossible, just that we don't have consistent data to demonstrate it. What we can say is that across Eurasia several families share typological traits, namely agglutinative morphology, subject-object-verb word order, and rich vowel inventories with vowel harmony. When you combine this with internal Uralic clues, such as the fact that the Ugric areal zone, containing Hungarian, Manse and Ante, is centred in western Siberia just east of the Urals, and that these languages show evidence of the longest mutual contact within Uralic, it then becomes understandable why many scholars still point to the Urals, western Siberia region as the most likely Proto-Uralic homeland. If that model is right, it implies an early westward spread towards wherever the Indo-Europeans were, since early contact between the two families is strongly evidenced. Regardless of a west or east of the Urals origin, by the time Proto-Uralic was splitting into early Uralic branches, it was likely distributed east to west across the southern Taiga zone. Many Uralic languages today are found much further north than this, but a far north homeland is unlikely based on linguistic and taxonomic clues. Also, one way to consider the homeland of Uralic is to think of it relative to other proto-languages. The Uralic homeland was east of Proto-Indo-European, south of Paleo-Siberian and Paleo-European, and west of pre-Turkic. Now, moving on from the Uralic homeland to the question of the Uralic language family tree, well, it might not come as much of a surprise to you if you've watched any of the recent videos on this channel, but it too currently lacks consensus amongst specialists. What's broadly accepted is a set of lower level sub-branches, numbering 9 in total, including Finnic, Samic, Mordvinic, Mari, Permic, Hungarian, Mansi, Ánte and Samoyedic. The problem lies in how the intermediate branches are arranged up to Proto-Uralic. The classic organisation, which is on screen now, was common in the literature up until the 1980s, and some heavy-hitting researchers like Janhunen, who we've met before on this channel, still use versions of it in their work with a kind of east to west binary division pattern. However, one of the standing issues in Uralic studies is that these sub-branches have not been evenly studied. Some have received far more attention than others, and as researchers have highlighted those gaps and filled them, several of these conventional nodes look increasingly shaky. Take the first split. Traditionally, many framed Samoyedic as the earliest branch because of its apparent deviant features compared to the rest of the language family. This was suggestive of an early separation, but recent work shows that Samoyedic, particularly its lexicon, is in fact not so exceptional after all, and this then casts doubt on it necessarily being the first to split away. What is clear, however, is that it shows heavy influence from an unknown pre-Samoyedic substrate. And actually, this whole area is fascinating because we can garner a lot about the nature of the pre-Samoyedic substrate just by studying Samoyedic. So many experts remain somewhat agnostic about strict branching tree models in Uralic, and even those academics who back a particular tree model are seldom diehard about it. This simple cone model on screen now is probably the best way to depict the Uralic language family at present, with an approximate ordering on an east-west axis. In the excellent volume from the Routledge language family series on Uralic, which is behind me, they take a pragmatic approach to grouping the Uralic languages based on dispersal types rather than any kind of strict genealogy. They identify 3 groupings. First, those that branched off and moved north. Second, those that branched and moved relatively modest distances. And third, a Ugric grouping, which may or may not be genetically related, but for sure shows a dramatic period of convergence in the past. Whatever the answers are to the tree and homeland questions, dating the divergence of Proto-Uralic has more consensus in the literature, with about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago often cited in modern texts. Older works do sometimes push it back to around 6,000 years ago, or even more, but those dates lean on archaeological assumptions. The recent trend towards younger datings comes from Indo-European loanword layers and comparative rates of linguistic change. Now, in a recent video, we looked at Jean-Paul Demoule's so-called challenge to the Indo-European question. We don't have time to go into the details again, but if you're curious, I recommend checking that particular video out after this one. For those who haven't seen it, basically he rolls out these same tired arguments against comparative linguistics that we've all heard before, namely that there's no verifiable evidence for Proto-Indo-European. We don't have any Proto-Indo-European text, for example, and that therefore the Indo-European family tree model is also unverifiable, and that it doesn't matter because there's no real consensus amongst specialists about its structure anyway. De Mol likes to add his own particular twist, arguing that both the proto-language and the tree sit atop some hidden far-right agenda in Indo-European studies. De Mol's book is in many ways strikingly similar to a book published a little over 20 years ago by linguist Angela Marcantagno titled The Uralic Language Family: Facts, Myths and Statistics. Like de Mol, the author challenges the existence of the Uralic language family, calling into question linguistic reconstruction and comparative models. Similar to de Mol, she points to supposedly nefarious political undercurrents influencing the direction of linguistic study, although in Marcantagno's case it's more of a footnote than like half of the book, as we saw with de Mol, and this time the author's fingers point towards communists instead of the fascists of de Mol, or something like that anyway. Marcantagno's work caused a bit of a stir at the time, judging by how many prominent linguists took the time to publish critical formal reviews. In fact, just by reading the reviews, you get a really well-rounded overview of why the Uralic language family is in fact a justified label and for sure a language family. Marcantagno's work backfired a little bit there. But to be fair, given when the book came out, the author was perhaps right to urge Uralicists to try and better understand the complex web of contact zones that shaped the language group. That's basically the maximum amount of praise I can offer here. Because despite being a trained linguist, Marcantagno seemingly tosses out her training and tries to apply a kind of shotgun-style statistical analysis with the surgical precision of an axe. Her core argument can be summed up something like this: Uralic doesn't exist because it shares similarities with other Eurasian languages. She dismisses comparative reconstructions in Uralic as coincidence, yet takes the slightest similarity between a Uralic term and a non-Uralic term as evidence for her theory. She consistently and constantly misrepresents Uralic data that she's aware of and either cherry-picks sources that suit her, or rather was just grossly unaware of the breadth of data that actually existed on the Uralic languages at the time that this book was published. And honestly, this book deserves its own video. Judging by her later work, this piece on the Uralic language family reads like some kind of groundwork for her even more outlandish claims, up to and including that not only the Uralic language family doesn't exist as a genetic family, but she also pushes this line that makes Hungarian look closer to Turkic than either standard Uralic or in fact Turkic accounts actually allow. This is actually an old misconception that pops up every now and again, probably due to the genuine heavy contact Hungarian had with Turkic over time. But if you pick up literally any modern survey of the Turkic language family from a reputable source, and you'll see that the superficial parallels with Hungarian are explained by contact and borrowing. No specialist, Turkologist or Uralicist seriously doubts Hungarian's place within Uralic today. So let's go through an overview of the 9 branches, shall we? We'll start in the west with Samic and Finnic. Samic likely evolved in the early Iron Age in what is now southern Finland. It came under influences from Germanic and Baltic to the south, plus local Paleo-European varieties. Samic stayed in contact with early Finnic tongues, and its speakers formed hunter-fisher semi-mobile communities. As for Finnic, the proto-language's homeland sits somewhere on the southern edge of today's Finnic-speaking area, likely somewhere on the coast. In fact, according to some scholars, the first split in the Finnic branch occurred when communities moved inland. For an overview of the diversification of Proto-Finnic, please check out Kallio's 2014 work on the issue. Finnic also shows several layers of loanwords from Germanic connected to cattle breeding and agriculture, and borrowings from early Baltic languages connected to geography, flora and fauna. But these Germanic and Baltic contacts were probably independent of the Samic ones, although some early borrowings may have been shared. There's also a very old Indo-Iranian layer detectable in Finnic vocabulary. Moving on to Mordvin, this is a Western Uralic language family that never joined any big northward expansion. Proto-Mordvin is reconstructed based on two closely related languages, Erzya and Moksha. Proto-Mordvin carries mostly Turkic and Indo-Iranian loans, with the Iranian ones being older and the Turkic ones being more numerous. There's also a thin Baltic layer of borrowings present too. Compared to the other Western branches, Mordvin retains elaborate verb and noun inflection systems, well worth checking out if you're interested in that sort of stuff. Proto-Mordvin dispersed in the Middle Ages, clearly later than the dispersals for Finnic and Samic. Proto-Mordvin and Proto-Mari were long assumed to share an immediate common ancestor, but modern research treats them as independent primary branches of Uralic. Mordvin aligns more closely with the Western branches, whereas Mari exhibits several Eastern-like traits. The Maric branch has fewer Iranian loanwords than Mordvin, and it lies in a linguistic and cultural convergence area centred around several Turkic groups like Chuvash and Tatar, with other minor Uralic Permic groups on the periphery. Like Mordvin, Mari dispersed significantly later than the Samic and Finnic and never underwent any northwards or significant northwards expansion. Permic is another branch, however, and that did experience northward expansion. The southern dialects show greater diversity than the northern ones. Iranian loans are as numerous as we see in Mordvin, and Turkic influence is notable throughout the family. Iranian loans are connected to metallurgy, cattle breeding, social life and mythology. Proto-Permic has a reconstructible vocabulary similar to that of Finnic or Samic, which points to dispersal around the same time period. Inside the spread of the Uralic languages, Proto-Permic was spoken in a slightly southern, slightly western area. Next up is Hungarian. Early borrowings into Hungarian can be divided into three layers: Iranian, Turkic, and those from other Uralic languages. While the traditional Ugric group in Uralic is now questioned, Hungarian still shares unique lexical items with the other so-called Ugric languages, alongside borrowings from some Permic type language or possibly another as yet unattested Uralic branch. These borrowings clearly happened outside the current Hungarian speaking area. Turkic borrowings are numerous, yet I still feel that sometimes it's over-exaggerated in the literature. They cover things like agriculture, cattle breeding, religious concepts, family members. It's also important to remember that modern Hungarian has plenty of loans from neighbouring Indo-European languages. Generally, Hungarian doesn't resemble any other Uralic branch, but if we had to pick a branch that it was closest to, it would be the Mansi branch. In fact, some authors have recently proposed in the literature a Mansic branch, consisting of Hungarian and Mansi. But to be honest, the idea hasn't gained a wide consensus. Most correspondences look like convergence, though Mansic as an idea is definitely work in progress. Some of the features that align Hungarian with Mansi are on screen now. Mansi has loanwords from Tatar, Permic and Samoyedic sources. Khanty shows a nearly identical set of loan sources with the addition of a Tungusic layer, which I think is quite curious. Khanty has three main varieties, northern, eastern and southern. All three differ sharply from each other. The eastern one, however, can be considered most archaic. Mansi and Khanty groups had various lifestyles and settled in various terrains. Some Khanty conducted large-scale reindeer herding, while others participated in different combinations of hunting and fishing. Early accounts of both groups of speakers showed them to be relatively well developed, with large trading networks and impressive fortifications. Both the Mansi and the Khanty share many cultural traditions typical of northern Eurasia, such as the bear cult and epic poetry. At the same time, the horse plays a significant role in Khanty mythology, which strongly suggests that their original homeland lay further south than their current territory. In fact, according to the literature, Hungarian, Mansi and Khanty all likely shared a common homeland in the southern Ural area, right between the boundary between the taiga and the steppe. The three groups probably date to a similar time as the Samic and Finnic branches. Samoyedic is the easternmost branch and one that also underwent significant northward migration. Samoyedic languages show high internal divergence, so that means that they differ from one another more than, say, the Samic and Permic branches do. But nothing too dramatic. It's kind of the same difference that we see in the Germanic or Romance branches in Indo-European. The Samoyedic languages have had early contact with both Turkic and Tungusic languages, though generally less so than the Western branches. And the Yukagir languages of the Russian Far East show influence of early Samoyedic contact. Proto-Samoyedic communities were hunter, fisher, gatherers who didn't practice agriculture. A fascinating feature of the group is the presence of thick lexical strata of uncertain, likely Paleo-Siberian origin. Now, as Samoyedic research advances, more lexical and grammatical correspondences keep turning up, steadily eroding this old idea that the Samoyedic branch stands far apart from the rest of the family. In some domains, like negation for example, Samoyedic in fact preserves ultra-conservative traits that match Proto-Uralic reconstructions nicely. Okay, now moving on to what you've all been waiting for, the proto-language itself. On screen now, we have the vowel inventory for Proto-Uralic. Uncontroversially, in the literature, Proto-Uralic is reconstructed with 8 values, contrasting height, backness and roundedness. Luobbal Sámmol Sámmol Ánte notes the following in his reconstruction of Proto-Uralic. The sets of front and back vowels were symmetrical. Each contained 3 cardinal vowels contrasting in height and an additional non-cardinal vowel differentiated from the corresponding cardinal vowel by its value of roundedness. A minimal consonant inventory for Proto-Uralic can be reconstructed as follows. The system we can see on screen now has 17 members, and this broadly agrees with most modern inventories published elsewhere. The exact phonetic value of the following items is debated in the literature, although their general reconstruction is uncontroversial, meaning that specialists agree these consonants existed, but not exactly what they sounded like. This value here is likely some sort of laryngeal. Broadly speaking, it could be any kind of back consonant that isn't one of the ordinary velars, and cross-linguistically, these laryngeals have a habit of influencing the values of nearby vowels. There's been some discussion in the literature regarding the parallels between the Uralic laryngeal and the Proto-Indo-European laryngeal inventory, with some suggestions that early Uralic loanwords might preserve traces of Proto-Indo-European laryngeals. While these observations are really intriguing, the precise nature of the correspondences remains debated, and ultimately the current set of plausible examples that we have is too small to support any strong claims. Proto-Uralic had a relatively simple but strict syllable structure. Proto-Uralic syllables had a vowel nucleus and either side could take a consonant. Consonant clusters did not exist word initially or finally, and only 2 consonant clusters were allowed medially. Gloids probably had a sort of special status in that they could be attached to the vowel without breaking any kind of basic syllable pattern. Whilst many Uralic languages show vowel harmony, or at least evidence of it once being present, its reconstruction in Proto-Uralic is debated. If it were present, it was likely a front-back harmony where stems contained either front or back vowels with some neutral vowels that could occur with either set. It appears there were some consonant restrictions on which consonants could feature word initially and word finally. I'll put those on screen now. Now, I don't know about you, but here's something I personally find pretty interesting. Proto-Uralic morphemes could be divided 3 ways. We had content word stems, function word stems, and suffixes. Function words, so think things like pronouns, demonstratives, the negative auxiliary that we find in Uralic, they tended to be short, often just a single syllable. Content words, by contrast, so words for things and ideas, they were always polysyllabic. This can be very useful, therefore, when trying to identify early loanwords into Uralic. Suffixes are less robust in their reconstructions, but the safest takeaway is that they're usually short, either a single consonant or a single syllable. It's interesting because individual consonant suffixes in Proto-Uralic frequently performed several unrelated functions, meaning that identical surface forms could represent distinct morphemes rather than a single multi-purpose suffix. Longer suffixes in Proto-Uralic are reconstructible, but they all appear simply to be suffix compounds. The case system had 3 grammatical cases and 3 local ones. Some reconstructions of Proto-Uralic suggest 2 additional adverbial cases, but their existence is uncertain. Proto-Uralic had 3 grammatical numbers, singular, dual and plural. However, what's interesting is that despite what we see in the daughter branches, Proto-Uralic case and number endings could not coexist. They occupied the same slot in the nominal complex. The one exception to this seems to have been a generic grammatical plural that could appear with the accusative and genitive cases. I'll put the reconstructed Proto-Uralic case and number endings up on screen now. And here we can see one common reconstruction of the ordering inside the nominal complex. The number and case positions are the ones we've just spoken about, and the first position after the root is reserved for derivational suffixes. In Proto-Uralic, these derivational suffixes had fairly general but semantically transparent meanings, and they were used to form different types of verbs, nouns and adjective-like stems from a root. A full discussion of Proto-Uralic derivational suffixes could easily be a video of its own, so here I'll just put a handful of examples on screen. For a deeper dive, see the Oxford Guide to the Uralic Languages, which discusses over 30 derivational suffixes that can be reconstructed for the proto-language. What's particularly interesting is what appears to be missing from reconstructed Proto-Uralic. At present, there is only weak evidence for adverbs as a distinct reconstructible word class in the proto-language. The final position in the nominal complex was taken up by possessive suffixes, and here we can see those on screen now. The consensus in the literature is that these possessive suffixes emerged as a result of the original pre-Uralic personal pronouns becoming affixed to the nominal complex. We can see the same process likely occurred for personal endings of verbs too. However, this grammaticalization process was essentially pre-Uralic, since we find the pronominal forms robustly attached to nominal and verb paradigms in Proto-Uralic. Concerning verb forms, due to the wide variation in verbal systems across the Uralic family, reconstructing the Proto-Uralic verbal paradigm is much more problematic than reconstructing the nominal forms. Finite verbs consisted of a root followed by 3 reconstructible positions for affixes. You can see the Proto-Uralic verb template on screen now. Proto-Uralic seems to have had only one slot in the template for mood or tense suffixes. It likely distinguished 2 tenses, a past and a non-past. The non-past could refer to either the present or the future, and this was probably unmarked. Mansi does have a marker. It's a K value for the present tense, which may be a reflex of an original Proto-Uralic form, since the Finnic branch shows some indirect traces of it. However, equally this could just as well be a later development. Most reconstructions differ on whether to formally accept a dedicated present tense marker into their Proto-Uralic reconstructions. The past tense markers are displayed on screen now. There are 2 that can be reconstructed, and most daughter branches generalised one of them as their main past suffix, sometimes keeping traces of the other. There is also some disagreement in the literature regarding mood markers. Besides the unmarked indicative, there is an imperative mood which is rather uncontroversially reconstructed with a second person marker in K, a voiceless reader stop again. This may be connected to the same K value that some scholars analyse as a proto or late Proto-Uralic present tense marker, although whether they are actually related is a matter of debate. That K element crops up repeatedly in various Proto-Uralic suffixes. Finally, there is some evidence for a subjunctive-like suffix, although its exact function remains unclear. Curiously, Proto-Uralic had a basic set of personal endings that marked the subject of the verb. These are named the subjective endings, and they're probably the oldest and most original verbal person markers in the proto-language. But there's also good evidence that Proto-Uralic had a second set of endings, used in the so-called special objective conjugation, where the suffix not only encoded information about the subject but also about the object, such as marking the presence of a definite object. All of these forms ultimately go back to the same grammaticalized personal pronouns that we see in the nominal system. Modern Uralic languages show variation in whether they utilize one set or both sets of endings. The only question is, do both sets go back to Proto-Uralic? Or was the objective conjugation a later innovation? Most researchers seem to accept the position that either or is possible without any particular preference to one scenario or the other. However, the basic set of endings that just mark the subject do indeed look older. They appear kind of worn, almost eroded by time and repetition, whereas the objective conjugation suffixes are much more vibrant. There is also a geographic split, with the easternmost branches, so Samoyed, Mansi, Khanty and Hungarian, utilising the objective conjugation, whereas the western branches, there is no overt evidence that the two sets can be found. This to me seems suggestive that Proto-Uralic maintained one set of personal endings for the verb. Regarding the Proto-Uralic lexicon, etymological research is steadily improving. Earlier work, especially before the late 1980s, was hampered by the lack of a well-defined reconstruction of Proto-Uralic phonology, and by uneven research coverage across the family, particularly for Mansi and Samoyedic. More recent work has shifted toward stricter criteria for regular sound correspondences and a critical re-evaluation of proposed etymologies, which has reduced the number of accepted reconstructions but increased their reliability. As mentioned previously, current research is also addressing gaps in our knowledge, including more comprehensive work on Samoyedic, which has traditionally lagged behind other Uralic branches in the identification of reliable Proto-Uralic etymologies. One thing's for certain, the next few years are shaping up to be an exciting time for those interested in Uralic studies. Approximately 500 Proto-Uralic terms can be reliably reconstructed. Of these, around 120 relate to the body and mental states, roughly 100 to basic actions, and about 120 to the natural environment. What is perhaps most revealing is what Proto-Uralic lacks. Parts of the basic kinship vocabulary remain difficult to reconstruct. There is no reliable vocabulary for agriculture, and material culture terms reflect a very early, pre-agricultural technological stage. Numerals also present significant reconstruction challenges, particularly in the light of the Samoyedic data. So what do you think? Pretty interesting proto-language, right? It's definitely one of my favourites. It's been one of my favourites to research. Before making this video, I had always wanted, but never really managed to, take a deep dive into the Sami branch. But after making this video and having gone through all of the material, I can definitely say now it's Mordvinic that looks the coolest. There's some very interesting stuff going on with their verb paradigms. I would love to, if I had the time, to take a deeper dive into that. But let me know what you thought. There's definitely enough material for a second video on the Uralic language family. It's always a tough call knowing what content to put in and what to leave out, and the level of detail that's going to be most interesting for the greatest number of people. You know how it is, but if there was enough demand for a second video on Proto-Uralic or the language family in general, I would definitely be up for it. Now, before I go, I would just like to say thank you to everyone who has watched any of my content over the past few years. I've just hit 10,000 subscribers, which was a big personal goal for me this year with this channel. And obviously, without every one of you liking, subscribing, sharing, all the comments, the feedback, the video suggestions, they're very important. All of that stuff that you've given me over the years, it's fair to say that it's been a team effort to get to this 10k mark. So I want to thank you for helping me out in that regard. And I'm sure we'll get to 20k in a relatively short period of time. Anyways, I've been Learn Hittite. I'll be back soon with another video. You've been fantastic as always. Goodbye for now.